Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful day. Well, at least it's beautiful here in California. We were just talking about how we have no rain, but it is beautiful. Welcome to our next workshop on elderberries. Our lunchtime workshop. We're doing these nice and quick and fast, and I'm really thankful that you guys have been able to come and join us. And to those of you watching later, welcome also. This is our focus today is on growing an organic certification. So last a couple weeks ago, if you remember, we talked about elderflowers and the market for elderflowers and growing elderflowers even in a hedgerow and being able to have those certified organic. We kind of touched on that a little bit. So we will be getting into that today as well. So what are we going to be covering? We're going to be going through with a really special volunteer. I'm so thankful that Christiana has offered her expertise today to talk about the basics of getting certified organic, because it can be a daunting task. And so she's going to walk us through, you know, the actions that get taken, the requirements that are needed, the costs that are associated with it, and give you a general overview. So I would like to introduce you to Christiana Shaw. She is a CCOF inspector, and I'm just going to clarify this right from the beginning. She's an inspector, not a consultant. So there's a difference. The inspector is the person who actually comes to your farm and looks through all of your paperwork and your forms and checks your setup and all of that, and does the inspection. There are also consultants that help you get ready for those inspections. And it seems kind of obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. A consultant cannot then turn around and be your inspector because it would be a conflict of interest. So there are consultants whose business is to help you fully prepare for the organic certification process. And we will talk about how you can find those consultants too. But so I just want to welcome Christiana. She's a CCOF inspector that's going to be talking with us today. She's originally from Italy, but has been living in Santa Cruz for a while. She attended the UCSC for agroforestry. Is that right, Christiana?
Agroecology, actually.
Oh, agroecology. And she's an all-around plant and food lover. She has a couple elderberries growing in her own yard, but hasn't done anything with them yet, which maybe this will inspire you to. What else should I make sure I let them know about you, Christiana?
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, we're just going to dive right in. And myself, I'm Katie Renneker. I'm from Carmel Berry Company. We make fresh pressed elderberry products made with only American grown elderberries and also elderflowers. And as we've grown, we realized we needed to really help support growing the supply chain of American elderberries and elderflowers, because over 95% of elderberries and elderflowers are imported from Europe, but it is a native plant here. And there's so much potential for growers. So if you're this far along on our journey, you know how passionate I am about sharing information to help growers get started on elderberries and elderflowers. I've paired up with some growers up and down the West Coast to work kind of under the umbrella of West Coast elderberry growers. And it's really a support network for growers up and down the West Coast getting started on elderberries and elderflowers. But a lot of what we talk about is applicable to the rest of the U.S. Growing commercially as well. And the focus is absolutely commercial growing. So without further ado, I'm going to actually turn it over to Christiana, and she's going to start walking us through the basics of getting certified organic.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk about, obviously, from the inspector point of view of what are all the things that are expected from an organic grower. I'm going to try to address some of the concern as they relate to elderberry growers, possibly either farming elderberry, growing them in hedgerows, or wild harvesting them. I want to give you a little bit of background, first of all, about what organic means. We can move to the next slide. Organic is a federally regulated word. After the organic movement became strong, the federal government decided to limit fraud. They had to strictly regulate it. So they created some rules, which we call the organic regulation, which is part of the USDA, the National Organic Program. So there is a part of the USDA that deals with organic. It's called the National Organic Program. And they have the regulation all written in part 205. And this is accessible online. And it's, I would recommend anybody that wants to become organic to either get a consultant or at least get a background on the regulation, because it will tell you exactly what is expected of you as far as practices and as far as record keeping. I say half of the organic certification is growing organically, half of it is keeping records. And that's a big part of what I do as an inspector, is to go to a farm and make sure that everything has been documented properly. So the federal government created the regulation, but the federal government does not give you your certification. So the federal government contracts this work to a certifier. So I work for CCOF, and CCOF is a certifier. There are many certifiers in the US, hundreds, I believe, some big, some small, some work internationally. Some do more handling and some do more growing, but the certifier takes on the role of making sure that the grower is doing what they're supposed to. They're following the regulation. They will actually tell the grower how to address any non-compliances, and then based on the response of the grower, they will give the certification or not. Usually once you get certified, you stay certified until your certification is revoked. But you have to have an annual inspection every year to make sure you're staying compliant, and then your certification gets renewed. And this is where the inspector comes in. So once you apply for your certification, there is an initial inspection where the inspector comes in and makes sure everything has been set up, the practices and the paperwork are set up properly. And then once a year, the inspector comes to a scheduled inspection and controls all the same things for the past year, and actually technically for the past 5 years. And I can tell you more later when we talk about the inspection. There are also unannounced inspection by law. About 5% of all operations have unannounced inspections every year. So that means once every 20 years, you might get somebody showing up at your farm and asking you to show the paperwork and look around your farm to make sure everything is okay. So as I said, CCOF then is a certifier. They're one of the oldest one in the US. They actually helped the government to create the organic standard. Most of the farmers are here in California, but I think there are some all over the US. And some of the information I give you as far as the certification applies to all certifiers. And then I'll tell you there are some tidbits that might differ between different certifiers. So we can move on to the next slide.
I just forgot to say, if you have questions, which I know you will and hope you will ask them, please put them in the chat. We found that we will, if everybody, when you think of it, stick it in the chat. We are not going to stop in the middle and answer every question. We will save time at the very end to go through all the questions. So please, for now, when you think of it, stick it in the chat, and then we will get to them all at the end. Okay.
And then Katie, yeah, in the next slide, you can see you can go to the USDA website and it will actually give you a list and help you find a certifier. Some certifiers specialize in certain areas. Some of them specialize in livestock. They have different ways of charging you. The fees schedule is different. So, and the services might be different as well. So, but you want to make sure they are accredited. You can't just go to somebody that says, hey, I'm a certifier, and then turns out they're not. So the USDA website can help you with that. And Katie, we can move on to the next slide. And I already mentioned this. So CCOF, I guess they do some policy. They actually try to advance the interest of its organic members. So they do some policy. They actually have some grants. They provide support to organic farmers in different ways. And as you can see, they have 3,200 producers. We can move to the next slide again. Okay, so this is the nitty-gritty of what you will have to do to become certified organic. First of all, one of the main first step is to fill out what's called an organic system plan, which is kind of a contract. It's actually a contract, let's say, that you do between you, the certifier, and the government. And in the organic system plan, which usually it's not from scratch, it's a bunch of forms that get filled out at application, you explain to your certifier and the government how you're gonna do things. Like, this is how I'm gonna sell my product. This is how I'm gonna take care of my soil. This is what my rotation is gonna look like. This is how I'm gonna prevent contamination. You're gonna address all your practices and give special attention to any practice where organic and conventional could get mixed up, or there could be contamination. I want to say, for a simple, like if you do wild harvest, is maybe at the most 8-10 pages, and then if you are a very complex growing operation, you can have 20 plus pages. But once you fill it out and you submit it, it's a living contract, and you're supposed to make sure it applies to your operation all the time. And that's one of the things that we do at inspection. We come and make sure you're still doing, your practices are still reflected in your organic system plan. Anyways, once you submit it to your certifier, they review it, and then they send a new applicant inspection. So that would be your first inspection. We go over the organic system plan in detail. We make sure everything it's, again, what we see at the farm is what is written on paper. And then we write a report. So as inspectors, we don't decide if you can be certified or not, and we cannot tell you how to address anything that we find that is not compliant. We can tell you, I found this is not compliant, but I cannot tell you, if you do this, you will be compliant. Sometimes we can tell you how other farmers in the area have addressed a similar situation, but we can't really give you solutions or recommendations. And we cannot tell you for sure, or even tell you what the certifier will decide based on what we find out at inspection. So we write a report. We usually write all the circumstances, you know, like maybe this paperwork was not in order, but this is the reason. So we try to explain, give the whole picture to the certifier. And then the certifier, after reading the report, tells you how to address any issues. And there's different levels, obviously. You know, there's little issues that you can address before the next inspection. There are little, slightly bigger issues that you get a few months to address. And then there's very serious issues that get escalated. And those are very rare from my experience. And this is where you see number 5, conditions and resolutions. So that's when they tell you, okay, fix these issues, and then we'll give you your certification. And as I said earlier, once you get your certification, it's valid until revoked, as long as you do your inspection yearly. And so every year you will have to renew, you will actually have to submit a renewal to the certifier, pay yearly fees. And I think we have a slide coming up, but so you'll pay at application, then every year you pay your fees for the yearly renewal. We can move to the next.
So I just want to point out, so, if you're on site doing an inspection and you see that things are not right, like they're missing something should not have been applied, or something, you see something that should be corrected, that's the job of a consultant, would be to help figure out their plan of how to rectify it, rather than your job as the inspector. So people can't just have the inspector like, well, how do I fix this? The job of the inspector is just to report on what is or is not happening, and then they will work on rectifying it later. Is that right?
Yes, and actually the certifier will tell you how to rectify. I recommend, if you are going to get a consultant, that you get a consultant that prevents you from having having these issues. So before you start applying things, before you actually get a plan with them. But yes, CCOF will then tell you how to rectify, but if you need special help on details and how to make it happen, yes, the consultant will also do that. And obviously, I don't know how much consultants charge, probably by the hour. So it's in your interest to have a clear idea of what is required of them, and how to minimize cost if that's important. So the organic regulation, the use of the word organic is actually the most important part of the regulation. The regulation is part of the marketing laws. What it's regulating really is when you can use the word organic. So there's lots of information in the rules of when you can use it and when you cannot use it. There is an exception. So you have to be certified organic to use the word organic, even if you're not making a claim that it's organic. For example, you could not say grown with organic methods. That doesn't exist. You either certified organic, or you cannot use the word organic at all, except if your gross income is less than $5,000 a year, you're exempt from certification. You don't need to be certified. You cannot say certified organic. You cannot use any of the seals. You can use the word organic, and the USDA is the one that is in charge of enforcing that. So there wouldn't be a certifier or an inspection, but you would be liable directly to the USDA. And so that's $5,000 gross income. So part of the regulation is how to use the seals. There's lots of rules about the color, the placement. So labels are a very important part. If anybody here is gonna label, I mean, if you're growing elderberry to then sell them to be processed is different. But if you're gonna grow something, you wanna place close attention to the labeling. Make sure everything is organic, is labeled organic. If it's transported on receipts, that's what we call an audit trail. A product has to maintain its organic status at every step of the way, so it can't be mixed in with other products. And this is especially important if you're doing organic and non-organic. You want to make sure you have a plan. My organic elderberry are different than my non-organic elderberry in the way they're packaged and shipped. Go ahead.
And that value added thing that you're talking about for labels for different things, I mean, that is a whole other topic that we will cover in the future, because the compliance for labels using the word organic is a huge topic in and of itself. You're right.
Yeah, and right now I'm focusing on growing elderberry.
Yes.
There's the organic certification has different scopes. There is growing, processing, wild harvest, and then I'll tell you more about the difference between wild harvest and growing. But Then if you're doing value added, that will be handling. You will have to do a lot more paperwork, and the inspection would also involve all your processing as well. And then any retail labels will be strictly monitored. There are a lot more rules about retail labels than there are about wholesale labels, obviously.
Right.
So I want to mention briefly that states have organic programs as well. Here in California, you also have to be, if you're an organic grower, you also have to be enrolled in the state's organic program, the CDFA. So you get a number, and you cannot get organic certified unless you are registered with the state as well. And I don't know about other states because I only work in California, but I imagine that every state has some little rule. Usually the county agricultural commissioner is the source of information about that. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so briefly, organic, it's a system that in which the ecological balance offers help to grow and the crops and manage pests and diseases. In this system, we worry about natural resources, so we have to take care of soil, water, biodiversity, and beneficial organisms. So as it says here, organic is based on a minimal use of off-farm inputs and on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony. The regulation is not does not spell this out very clearly. So this is a very broad concept, and it's we look at specific situation of every farm, and I will say there are many different ways of address the natural resource part of the regulation. But the idea is that you're thinking about your natural resources and you're doing something to maintain or improve them. And so here it talks about more organic is more the input substitution. This is very interesting because the regulation is based on agriculture as it was in the 70s and 80s. And now, back in the day, there weren't that many organic materials available. So growers really had to focus on preventative practices. Right now, there are hundreds of organic materials available. And farmers use them. Farmers use them, but we always try to figure out, okay, you can't just base your farming on these organic materials. Tell us what you're doing to try to prevent using them. So we can move on. Okay, so Katie told me that some farmers here might be wild harvesting. So I want to tell you that the regulation actually makes a distinction between wild harvesting and crop, but they're very similar. The only difference is if you're harvesting a wild crop, this crop cannot receive any input whatsoever. It cannot be watered, cannot receive any pesticides or fertilizers. So as far as the paperwork is concerned, though, it's very similar. The fees for CCOF are very similar. And as I say, so in the second step, so you still have to fill out OSP, an organic system plan, which will be much smaller because you have a lot less practices to describe. You still have to have a land application. So you still have to say, this is where I'm harvesting. You can't just stop on the side of the road and harvest randomly. You have to have a specific area, and you have to have the certifier visit this area, and it has to show in your certification as your certified parcel. All land that can be certified organic has been managed organically for the previous 3 years. So you either take it, you either have control in those 3 years before organic certification, or you get whoever was controlling that land to give you documentation of how that land was free of prohibited substances. That's how we say it. In case of wild land, it would be, for example, a letter from an agency. If you're collecting on, like an agency's land or government land, they will guarantee that no prohibited substances are used on that land. And usually what we look at is borders. Are there sources of contamination from the outside? And then we'll go and inspect and see the plants as they're growing. If it's a farm, it's usually very easy. You just drive around and see the production. If it's a wild area and it's very extensive, we might not visit every single plant you're harvesting from. But we want to go and see some of them, and we want to go and see how you're harvesting, because for wild harvest, how you preserve your natural resources is making sure you don't over harvest or damage the plants when you're harvesting. So you will show us like, okay, I'm harvesting, let's say, I don't know. I never done so disclosure, I never done an elderberry farm or wild harvesting operation. But I would expect somebody to say, okay, I'm not harvesting 100% of the berries. I'm harvesting some, I'm leaving some for the birds and the wildlife. I am not whacking the plants to get to the fruit. I'm not going in with my 4x4 when the soil is muddy and compacting the soil in the area. So it will be a description of how are you managing this harvest in a way that's respectful of the natural resources. There are some record keeping that is required. It's the same whether you're wild harvesting or farming, and that will be your harvest records and your sales. We want to know how much product you're harvesting and how much you're selling. And then again, as I mentioned, your natural resource records. What are you doing and how are you making sure that it's working? Katie also said some people might want elderberries as hedgerows. The one thing I want to say is if the hedgerow is already there and established and nobody's watering or, again, spraying it or feeding it, it can be considered wild. Although if it's on your land, it doesn't make sense to have it classified as wild because you already have control of the land. If it's on somebody else's land, it could be considered wild and you just have that access to that strip. The important thing about hedgerows is they separate an organic farm from a conventional farm, and they can be close to sources of contamination. So that will be looked at closely. It's like, is this hedgerow right next to a conventional farm? Is there enough space? What is the prevailing wind? So if you're going to harvest from hedgerows, it might not be clear if it can be harvested as organically until the situation surrounding the hedgerow is evaluated.
And what does that look like? Is there a certain number of feet that has to be a buffer between a field on the other side of this hedgerow, or how is wind taken into consideration?
This is interesting because the regulation does not specify the distance, so it's on a case-to-case basis. I know generally 50 feet is considered the average in the US, 25 feet here in California because we farm so much tighter. But again, this depends on the prevailing winds and how they're applying pesticides in the farm upwind from you. If they're spraying when there is wind and they're spraying high to the ground, that 25 feet might not be enough. If you have a good relationship with the neighbor, for example, and you get a letter from the neighbor that says, we only spray when the wind is below 2 miles per hour and our nozzles are very straight to the ground, and we turn off the nozzles when we're turning because usually they come to the end and then turn. So then that we can say that might work too. Again, it's really determined on a basis to basis situation. Sometimes putting wind barrier, like some farmers would put cloth to, if the distance is questionable or if the situation is questionable, they put a cloth fence, and that is considered enough to stop any drift. So let's say 25 feet in California is the average, 50 in the States. And then if the wind is coming from the part that's conventional, are there measures in place to decrease the risk? Going back to the crop part, so I wanted to tell you, some certifiers might give you a cheaper rate for being a wild crop harvester. CCOF treats wild harvest as the same as a farmer, so there is no advantage to have it classified as wild crop. And I don't know if some areas of the country where there are more wild crops, maybe they give a fee discount, so that would have to be investigated. But so other than the same paperwork, sales, harvest, natural resources, and the organic system plan, then the farmer will have to do, obviously, more paper, keep more records. And I think, Katie, we can move forward, but if to the next slide. Okay, no. This is something I already explained to you. It's about the organic system plan. That's the living contract between you, the certifier, and the government. And again, it gets submitted once a year. It gets reviewed at the first inspection. It gets reviewed at the yearly inspection. And the farmer is responsible to let the certifier know if there are changes. And there's different degrees of changes. We can move forward to the next slide. And let me finish telling you about the changes. So change number one, materials. If you use, all your materials that you use have to be pre-approved by your certifier, even if they're a material that it's okay to use in organic agriculture, it still has to be on your organic system plan, and you have to be approved before you change it. You have to not let your certifier pre-approve your labels. So those are the two biggies that you have to get approval before you change. Then the other changes can happen either after. You can get in touch with your certifier, or you can update inspection. But another important thing will be, for example, if you're selling directly to consumer, if you're doing markets or selling through a CSA, that's something that the certifier really wants to know, because they need to make sure they can keep an eye on you. But anything else, for example, on my well now, I used to share it with a conventional grower, and now it's dedicated, or vice versa. Those things can be updated at inspection. The important thing is that you bring them up to the inspector. You tell them, okay, these are the changes, because inspectors and certifiers find it an issue. It's an issue of concern if we find that things have changed and you have not told us. So obviously different degrees. So what the organic system plan does, we explained earlier, is tells us how you address contamination and commingling, figure out how you're going to address areas of risk. And for example, if you have shared equipment, like a bucket that you're using to harvest elderberry, if you're harvesting conventional elderberry, you cannot use it to harvest organic elderberries after, unless you washed it or you have dedicated. And I'm saying bucket, it could be any equipment for spraying, for harvesting. So are there cleaning procedures in place, or do you have dedicated equipment? If you're transporting organic and conventional, how do you make sure they don't get mixed up? And then some other areas that could pose contamination risk, like treated lumber, are also addressed in your organic system plan. Existing treated lumber is okay. New treated lumber is prohibited, just so you know. That's the main rule. We talked about the land requirements. It has to be managed organically for 3 years previous to becoming organic. And I heard that somebody here grows hydroponically. Is that what you said, Katie?
No, I don't actually know of any hydroponic growers. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, elderberry hydroponic. That sounds interesting. Okay. There is a different rule for hydroponics because if it's in a greenhouse with a concrete floor, that doesn't apply. And just so you know, hydroponic is not allowed for export to Canada, just in case somebody wants to do it. And it says here, the land has to have distinct boundaries. We talked about that. We want to inspect the boundaries. So a map will be submitted to the certifier, and that map will represent the land that is certified. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so these are additional rules about planting stock. So you can use conventional planting stock, but if you're reselling it as a plant, you're buying a conventional plant and you're selling it as a plant, it has to be managed organically for a year. If you're taking a conventional plant and planting it in your organic parcel, you cannot harvest organic fruit unless the fruit has come from fruiting wood that was produced under organic management. So let's say you plant the plant and the branch that was already there makes some fruit, that's not okay. Unless a year has passed or the fruit is coming from a new branch. So whatever is the soonest. I'm not super familiar with the fruiting habits of elderberry, but I imagine
I mean, when you, it's actually pretty common for people to get cuttings that might not be from a certified organic nursery, and they put them in the ground. So this is really helpful to know about that year time frame. And once they're established after about 2 years, then they fruit on the first year growth. But generally, you don't harvest from new elderberry for for a year, if not 2. So
yeah, I figured it was a moot point, and we encounter that in all fruit trees. Usually, the fruit trees have to be in the ground for a while, anyways. An important requirement is rotations, and this is very important for a perennial system like an elderberry, where the berries will be in the ground for many years. The regulation requires that there is something else growing on that land for part of the year. So if you have a mixed orchard and you have elderberries and other fruit and other plants, that doesn't matter. But if you have a elderberry orchard, let's say, where elderberries are all that you're growing, you want to make sure you're growing something else part of the year. And so either doing a cover crop between the plants or having a no-till ground, or doing rows of different plants in between the rows of elderberries every once in a while, some other perennial but alternated. And this is about soil health, really, just not creating a monoculture. So how can that be addressed? But yeah, the easiest thing for perennial orchards usually is a cover crop part of the year. Soil management. So the regulation talks about organic matter. You are not supposed to decrease, or ideally you increase organic matter in the soil. So we'll look for practices that you're doing to maintain your organic matter, either adding compost or organic materials or cover cropping. And then we'll ask you how you're monitoring that in the long term. And then inputs. There are obviously inputs that can be used and inputs cannot be used. All inputs have to be pre-approved. There are different layers of inputs. There are the inputs that you can be sure you can use it because it has an OMRI seal. The Organic Material Review Institute puts a seal on it that it's okay to be used for organic. So your risk is low, but you still need to have it pre-approved by CCOF. Then there are some other materials that don't have a pre-approval by an outside agency like OMRI. And I'm sorry if, so I'm now starting to speed up because I see we're running out of time, but OMRI or some state departments look at all the ingredients of the materials and then put a seal on them saying that they're okay to be used on inorganic production. In this case, it can be used, but it still has to be approved. There are other materials that can be used, but they don't have those seals. Let's say I make my own garlic powder, pest control. I just mix garlic and water. I still have to have that approved, but then my certifier will have to review the ingredients. And so you'll have to submit a request to your certifier and say, hey, I'm making my own pesticide. Here is how I make it. And then they will tell you if it's approved or not. So we can move. So seeds and planting stocks are considered inputs. I think we can skip this one since we already talked about plant stock. And we talked about maintaining or improving your soil organic matter. There are special regulations about raw manure. So you want to make sure that there is enough time between your application of raw manure to your harvest, which is 90 days in the case the fruit doesn't touch the ground. You also, if you make your own compost and apply within that window, you'll have to show that you have reached a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. So we can move to the next one. Pest management, as I said earlier, we want to make sure you're taking steps to prevent pests before you apply, you spray, even if it's benign sprays like a garlic powder spray. Because even organic pesticides can be dangerous to beneficial insects, you know. Actually, organic pesticides, because they're often generalists, you know, they will kill on contact, then they can be dangerous to beneficials and pollinators. So we really want to address the prevention. We can move on to the next one. And this is, we were talking about materials. So in general, we can say synthetic materials are prohibited and non-synthetics are allowed, but there are exceptions, and those can be found in those sections of the regulation. And you can Google, for example, 205.601 and 205.602. Non-synthetic prohibited for use, for example, will be a nicotinoid. So any product with nicotine is natural, but it cannot be used in organic. And that gets updated. While the regulation doesn't change often, the national list is called. So this part of the regulation that talks about input is called the national list. That is updated every year. So you need to be up to speed with that. And your certifier will probably have a mailing list. So they will send you an email every time there is a change in the national list saying, hey, this material is okay, this material is not okay. And then some materials have restrictions, so you can use it, but only if. All pest control can only use if you do prevention. Then there are other restrictions. For example, Chilean nitrates, which is a very, very available form of nitrogen, can only be used to up to 20% of the nitrogen needs of your plants. So some materials will have that. And once your certifier will give you your approved list of materials, it will show the restrictions. And also you can look them up on the OMRI website if the material is OMRI listed. We can move on to the next one. Okay, so we're saying OMRI, Washington State Department or the California Department of Food and Ag will give a seal to a material that it's allowed for organic inputs, for organic farming, but you will still have to put it on your list of approved materials. We can move forward.
Does that change? But I mean, you've listed Washington and California. Does every single state have a different database to check?
No, and the database is the same. What it means is that me as a producer of a fertilizer, let's say, I want to put this seal on my fertilizer that shows to organic farmers that this is okay to use. So I can pay OMRI, which is the biggest and older organization that does that, to review my ingredients and put the seals to make it easy for growers to use it. I can also, if I'm based in California, or anywhere, if I'm based anywhere, but if my target is California farmers, I can ask the California State Department to put that seal on it, and I'll pay them, and so on and so forth. As far as I know, there's only these 2 states that do it so far because their organic agriculture is so big. I know that actually the USDA has started putting a seal on organic or materials approved for organic recently. So, but let's say they have a list of who their clients are, but it doesn't change whether or not a material is either approved for use in organic or it's not. Right. Whether it shows on that list or that list or that list. So there is no ambiguity about that. It's just that some companies might choose to have different seals based on who their target audience is.
Right.
Omri, though, I think that's about 99% of them. So
I think I skipped one here.
Control point. Okay, this is something I already mentioned. Equipment, anything that touches the crop could be a source of contamination, whether you are harvesting or applying product or custom applicators. So let's say a lot of people here hire somebody to come and bring fertilizer. In that case, you have to make sure that they have the right paperwork and they're following the good practices and separating conventional and organic materials. Irrigation water, if you're sharing a well with a conventional farm that's applying fertilizer in the lines, you need to have ways of making sure that that fertilizer is not going back into your lines when you turn on your irrigation. And then if you have organic and non-organic and you have materials for both, you have to make sure the materials are kept separate and marked so that there can be no confusion when the materials are applied.
I think what a lot of elderberry growers, that some of their biggest concerns, yes, it might be pest management, you know, putting neem oil or something on, but a lot of it is, you know, the inputs that they're putting on at the beginning, either compost they're applying or manure from their own farm or wood chips that they're getting from a chipping company nearby. So can you talk just a little bit about those inputs that you are buying from somebody else that's not a certified organic fertilizer company?
Yes, so in that case, you'll have to have a list of ingredients or an affidavit. Let's say you're doing wood chips, you want to get an affidavit from whoever giving you the wood chips saying that it's only wood, there is no treated lumber or other prohibited material that is chipped in there. If you're using manure that comes from bedding, that's kind of tricky because a lot of straw is treated with herbicides. So in that case, you want to have, let's say I'm taking my horse stalls manure and not composting it up to standard. So you're not reaching those temperatures for, now I don't remember them off the top of my head, but you have to reach certain temperatures for a certain amount of time. So if that's not happening, it's not considered compost. So you still have to look at all the ingredients and make sure that there is no contamination. So if you're using straw for bedding or shavings, you have to have an affidavit saying this has not been treated with herbicides or it's made of natural wood and not treated wood. It's actually very common that, yeah, straw is treated with herbicides for broadleaf weeds. So, and that is actually very toxic to plants as well. I know many, growers that have killed plants by applying this straw that has herbicide in it. So that is.
What about the diet of the animals?
That doesn't matter. No, it does not matter. And then, so you say compost. Lots of compost makers like facilities here, the Central Coastal list, they make compost from green waste. They actually are OMRI listed. they actually will get, or CDFA listed. So they will get a certification for you. So you can buy the compost from them, and it's already has been scrutinized.
Great.
And then let's see. So the record keeping, so this is wrapping it up. It's kind of like you want to make sure that everything you've used, your practices and your materials are compliant. We do an audit trail, so we want to make sure that what you sold that day actually came from your parcel. So whatever paperwork might be required to show that, you know, you're not harvesting some elderberries somewhere else and then putting them in the stream of organic blueberries that you're selling. So all the records of sales have to be kept. We usually inspect up to the back to the last inspection, but by law we could ask you up to 5 years. And that's usually if there is an issue, then we want to dig deeper. But if everything is okay, we usually just stick to the last year or to the past inspection. And records are very different for different operations. There is not one standard record. The bigger you are, the more records we require, obviously, to understand your operation. But sometimes it can be, if it's one crop, one parcel, one buyer, it can be like very, very simple. If the product is harvested and is sold immediately, then the sale receipt will even just be pretty much your all audit trail. And then I think that might be it. We have a few other things. I already talked about the annual inspection that you have to do every year to maintain your certification. And here is just saying, you know, why do you certify and why do we do inspection and why we're so strict? Sometimes I explain to my farmers, you know, we want consumers to really believe in organic, and so it's necessary that we enforce things. And I think that's it. We have a few other random slides, but I'm pretty sure.
I think we covered that. Oh, let's talk about this one with the fees.
Oh, there you go. That's right. So the fees, these are fees from 2017. So I know they've gone up like everything. So there is an application fee only once a year. Then there is the annual fee for just for applying and maintaining your certification. And those CCOF bases them on your gross income. Some other certifiers base them on acreage. CCOF has decided to go based on gross income. As you can see, I guess 0 to 100,000, they go up by a few $100s for every tier you go up. Then on top of those, you have your inspection fees. You actually pay for your inspection by the hour. So you definitely want to be very organized so that we don't have to spend a bunch of time on the farm and a bunch of time explaining things when we're writing the report, because you'll be paying for the travel time, the inspection time, and the review writing, the report writing time. So the more organized your operation is, the cheaper it is. And here it says the majority of CCOF inspection costs less than $550. So that's for an average farm.
Could you also, oh, go ahead.
There are some, I think there's some help with fees from in California, the CDFA offers, right now they're offering 50% of your annual fees. If you apply, they pay you back. If you're transitioning to organic, there are lots of grants. I know CCOF is giving some, the USDA gives some every year, is slightly different, but there are grants to transition to organic for new farmers. Also, we try to decrease the travel cost by combining several operations in a similar area, usually, just so you know, we do take into consideration that when we plan our inspections. What were you saying?
So say I don't live in California, say I live in Oregon, the best, or, you know, another state, going to some of the you know, the Oregon Tilth Certifier website, or to my state's agricultural website, is that where I might find leads for grants that might be out there to help cover costs?
Yeah, so I would contact a couple certifiers that you know they're active in your area. So it would be like your local certifier, and then let's say CCOF I know has a lot of farms in Oregon. I will contact them first of all and say how many farms you have in my area so that I know that my costs are lower for travel. You definitely don't want somebody flying from the other side of the country to come and see your farm. And then you will ask them, if I apply with you, what kind of help is there? I will just go call the certifiers because they have an interest in having you get on board with them. So I will call them and say, I'm thinking about getting certified. Is there any help? Can you help me with the paperwork? I know CCOF helps its growers with the paperwork for the cost share with the CDFA. And see, who offers you the kind of service you want.
Great.
And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Before I talk about, other ways to get more info, I just want to pause and go back to the Q&A for folks so we make sure that we cover some of the questions. First of all, I did this again. I forget every time. If you would like to drop in the chat where you are from, what you're going from, that has actually served to connect people who are near each other to help, facilitate you guys working together in your area. So if you want to pop in and just let us know where you're from, that would be awesome. So a question, Rich, your question was about the elderflower workshop, how to sign up. Send me an email, katie@carmelberry.com, and it will be in the slides also, and I'll send you the link to that. I don't just have a published YouTube page yet, so I just send them to everybody who wants them, and that way I can send you any handouts or follow-up info too. Cynthia says, we have both wild and cultivated elderberry plants growing on our farm, all certified CCOF organic. Do you see a marketing niche for organic wild harvest that may make it worth keeping the harvest separated? In terms of me as a potential buyer of berries like that, I think it probably mostly depends on the subspecies, because right now I am not buying too many blue elderberries because the quality of the juice is kind of all over the place. But I like the flowers from blue elderberries a lot better than I like the flowers from American elderberries. So I think that will be a question for who you think you would be selling to. Otherwise, it could be that the combination of the juice between the two is just great, and it would be fine. If it's all the same species, if it's all Sambucus canadensis, and you're growing some, in an orchard and some wild harvested, then there probably won't be that much of a difference in flavor. Paula, if I use compost manure for my own animals living on the farm, does their hay have to be organic as well? So I think that we covered that. Paula, if we didn't cover that question, then pop in again. Another question, if I use organic practices and my gross income is less than $5,000, I can use the word organic for my berries without needing the certification?
That is true. You cannot say certified organic. You cannot use any of the seals, but you'll find that your buyers will often require you to get certified. I see that all the time. Little growers, they only have $2,000, $3,000 of product. They say nobody will buy it from me without certificate. So, but yeah, you can use the word organic, no certified, and no seals.
In general, people tend to get a little bit more per pound for certified organic than not. But at this point in the elderberry game, you might find a local herbalist that doesn't care if it's certified or not, as long as you're growing it certified, and you might be able to just sell directly to them, something like that. So, wow, we've got West Virginia, Oregon, Delaware. Oh, thank you for sharing this, Mark, because I know, Mark, you're going through this right now with a lot of different certification grant applications yourself. Delaware will reimburse total amount for certified organic. So it makes sense to follow up in your own state. Oregon, more California, Virginia. Here's another question for you. What do you see as an advantage? Whoa, mine just jumped. What do you see as an advantage or disadvantage of trying to be organic versus just growing to sustainable agricultural practices? Do you have any thoughts on that, Christiana?
It all depends on your market and your buyer. That's my thought. It's
Yeah,
really,
I would
you
agree
have
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really depends on your buyer. Like I said, a small company who just prioritizes, the way you are growing, not just a certification, might be fine. A bigger company might have that be just their bottom line of if the box is ticked or not. So, it depends on, maybe if with less than an acre, it's not worth getting it certified at this point if you already have a buyer and that is not important to them. More Oregon. Oh my gosh, I love this. This is great. Now, this is a great example. There are a lot of Oregon growers all kind of starting at the same time in the same area, and having you guys connect and meet up to share costs like this will be really advantageous. What are acceptable for use for weed control? Plastic and cardboard. Can you get certified organic only a portion of a farm? So this is a great question. Christiana, talk to us about plastic, mulch, plastic cover for weed control, or cardboard.
So the regulation specifically talks about plastic mulch, and it cannot be PVC based. So PVC is not allowed for mulch. And most of the plastic mulch you find out there does not have PVC either way. The plastic has by law to be removed at the end of the season. And so what does that mean for elderberries? There's different grades of plastic. If you buy the cheap year that's designed for annual crops, at the end of the year when it starts tearing, you need to remove it so the little pieces of plastic don't end up in this mixed up with the soil. If you buy the more expensive stuff, the woven material, that it's rated to last 5, 10, 15 years, you can leave it in the ground, and we'll just be monitoring and making sure that once it starts falling apart, you're actually pulling it out and replacing it and not letting it just mix with the soil or fly around. As far as paper is concerned, as far as plastic, biodegradable plastic is not allowed yet because of the microplastic problem. So stay tuned. I think as new types of biodegradable plastic come on the market, this might change. As far as paper, it's the same as we discussed for the bedding for the animals. Is the paper non-treated? Does it have toxic inks? So if you're using brown untreated paper, it's fine. If you're using, so you will want to stay away from dyes that might be toxic for any, some cardboard is treated with fungicides, so you want to stay away from that. So you want to have a good source, and you want to document where, what your source is. And as far as certify only a portion of the farm, yes, you can. You gotta have clean, defined boundaries and ways, again, as we said, to separate the production, separate the inputs, and make sure there is no contamination between the two parts.
We have one last question that ended up in the Q&A that I just spotted. I'm glad I did. I have fields that have been fallow for more than a year that I want to use for organic elderberry production. At what point does the 3-year rule start? Does it start when I begin putting together my plan and documentation, or does the past year of being fallow qualify?
That's a great question. I'm glad you bring it up, because the 3 years have to be elapsed to the harvest date. So let's say you had, and they start when organic management started. So when you followed your land, as long as you didn't plant GMO seeds, but even if you planted, then that will be the last day of when the prohibited materials were used. So let's say whatever date that is, either the prohibited seeds were planted or the date that you started following it, that will be the first day. And then at the end of the 3 years, you can actually harvest organic elderberries. So you could plant your elderberries now and not harvest for 2 years. And then at the end of the total of 3 years, you could actually be harvesting. So you don't have to be, and that's what we call the transitional period.
And that works perfectly for elderberry, actually, for a perennial crop like that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do one last question, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you guys can keep on connecting, because that's another question. We have irrigation water from a surface water system that flows through multiple properties before it arrives at our farm. Is this a problem?
Yeah, so this will be one of those more tricky situations where it's considered case by case. So the surface water, what is it going through, and what are the likely sources of contamination? So
Right.
if you know that your neighbors are spraying herbicides along the ditch, then that might not work to use that water for your irrigation. If you can get letters from the people that are upstream from you saying they don't use any prohibited products right next to the water or anything that could flow in the water, then that would be okay. You also, I know some counties use, for example, mosquito eggs killers. So you might wanna or might have to get a letter from the county to say that they do not treat that surface water. So this is kind of one of those, again, case by case. The more documentation you have about where your water comes from, and more written documentation you have about the fact that the water does not get contaminated, the better.
Great. All right, we're going to stop there. This is super helpful, Christiana. Thank you so much. I learned so much. The question of how to keep on being connected. For commercial growers, we have two really good Facebook groups. The West Coast Elderberry Growers group is obviously focused on commercial growers out here in the West. And then there's the Elderberry Growers Connect. You can also search that for Facebook. It is all over the US and there's over the world, but it's also specifically for commercial growers, a fantastic place to get information. And then for brand new people, there's the New Elderberry Growers that is monitored by more experienced growers to kind of answer questions. But so that's a really good way of connecting. So if you're in Oregon and want to, reach out directly to other Oregon people, put it in the West Coast Elderberry Growers group. If you have questions for me or want the links to our previous workshops, I'm at katie@carmelberry.com. If you have a question for Christiana, remember she is not a consultant, but she does do inspections. But if you have a specific question and would like to follow up, there's her email as well. Oops, whoa, I went through that last one. I don't really know what I did, but the last one was a reminder that our Carmel Berry's website, or Carmel Berry's grants are coming up, and we will be accepting applications probably in the next month or so. I've got so many hats that I'm wearing, but the purpose of our grants is to help people who are brand new to or new to growing elderberries, or just in their first stage, that have a great strong plan, who are ready to really dive in, could use a little bit of seed money to help pay for irrigation, for certification costs, for plant starts. That's kind of where it goes with best. And then we help pair you with mentor farmers that have been doing this for a while, so you can ask more questions of them. So stay tuned. Also email me if you are interested in that. But that is all for now. And Christiana, thank you so much for your time. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.